So for those of you who are not familiar with us, I just want to say a little bit about the Global Hub. My name is Neil Johnson, and I'm based in Ireland. I run a not-for-profit called CREE, and I'm also involved in the Global Heart Hub. And at the outset, if I could acknowledge the support of our sponsors for the advocacy series, Novartis, Pfizer Pharma, Boehringer Lilly Alliance, and Servier. We really appreciate their support. And I'm just going through my slides here. So who we are, first of all, as I said, for those of you, most of you know of us, the Global Hub is an international alliance of heart patient organizations. And I'm very conscious that on today's call, we have patient organizations that are not just heart. We have some from the diabetes community, obesity community, stroke community, and indeed some other patient communities, and you're all very welcome. But the Global Hub really is aspiring to creating a platform which will unite the heart patient voice across the world. And the reason for this really is that we've come to realize that the cardiovascular patient community unfortunately lacks structure and cohesion. And relative to other patient communities like in cancer, which we're going to hear about today, rare diseases, visual impairment, and many others, we're certainly very underdeveloped in terms of advocacy capability and capacity. And so the idea of the Global Hub is to support the development of capacity building in terms of advocacy. And in the overall aspirations of the Global Hub, you'll see there that we want to be able to amplify the patient and carer voice as stakeholders in healthcare systems and in their personal healthcare, and to contribute to improved self-care, self-management through empowerment. Of course, those objectives are specific to our cardiovascular community. So we have started a journey, really. I think this is our fourth session, if I'm not mistaken. And the journey is really about sharing the experiences of champions in other disease areas to see what could we learn from what they have done and how they have articulated the voice and voices of their communities. And as this series continues, we hope that by June, July of next year, we'll be in a position to host a more substantial training boot camp or academy on advocacy, which will incorporate some of the and go deeper into some of the issues and topics that will be discussed over the coming months. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Professor Derek Stewart, and the professor, I believe, is a recent addition to his long list of accolades. Derek is born in Ayr, Scotland, and was treated successfully for cancer of the larynx in 1995. He's a former teacher from Glasgow and, in Glasgow and Nottinghamshire in the UK. And he subsequently became involved in numerous aspects of patient involvement at local, national, and international level. He was awarded an OBE in 2006, which is the Queen's Honours list for his services to health and in particular cancer care. And recently, and coincidentally, actually, it was after we had invited him, we became aware of the fact that he had been appointed as an honorary professor in our own university here in Galway for his work as a patient advocate involved in health research at the College of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences. And in fact, I had come across Derek previously when he spoke about PPI, which is an area of advocacy that he's heavily involved in. So again, to restate that while we're a cardiovascular organization, we're going to hear today from somebody who comes from the cancer community, which goes to the point I've just made, that we're on a journey of discovery and learning. We want to hear from what others have done in other disease communities to give you ideas and to inspire you as to what you can do in your respective areas. And just very quickly before I hand you over to Derek, could I ask everybody to go on mute, because there is just some background noise at the moment. So if we could have everybody on mute, and have your video turned on if you're speaking or asking a question. So Derek will speak. This meeting will run for 1 hour, and he should speak probably 30 to 40 minutes, or maybe 45, and the last remaining minutes will be open for questions. And because I can't see, as our numbers are now growing, we may have to move to a different platform for future sessions. I may not be able to see your raised hand. You can use the raised hand option on the screen after Derek has spoken to ask a question. But if I can't see that, I could suggest that you might also just type your question in the, should be a chat box, if I'm not mistaken. Is there a chat box there? There should be a chat box.
Yes, in the chat box.
If you
in the chat,
I'm not seeing it.
Everybody's chatting away behind your back.
Yeah. Why am I not seeing it on my screen though? That's interesting.
If you just scroll down to the bottom, Neil, and click on the chat icon, when you stop sharing, you'll see.
Oh, stop sharing. Okay, apologies. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we'll track the questions there. And just to say to you that views or comments expressed by participants during this recording are personal opinions and do not necessarily represent the views of the Global Heart Hub. So that's the disclaimer out of the way. So that brings me to today's speaker, an absolute privilege to introduce Professor Derek Stewart. Derek, over to you.
Thank you very much. So oh, can you see that?
Yep.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so I would normally do a call and response and shout hello and expect you to shout hello backwards, because I lost my voice to cancer 25 years ago. You've still got your voices, and I've just looked at the chat box. What a rich lot of experiences are in this room today. So I'm not going to talk a lot about cancer, but the examples I'm going to give are from cancer. So very simply, I was a teacher. I went along and my clinicians said, the best evidence is removal of your voice box. But because they were active in research, they said, do you know what? We think we can do with radiotherapy. So sometimes the best evidence is not always the best thing for us. I got involved with a whole lot of groups over the years, some of which you can see there. And today I'm going to talk about having a voice. And let me just reinforce it. If I can do it with my voice, you can definitely do it with your voices, right? It's about using our voice, speaking up, addressing issues, and making improvements. I'm not covering the ground about representation, legal advocacy, or standing in for others, although there may be times we touch on some of that. So what I'm going to talk about is confidence, believing in yourself, some of the right to be there and have your voice heard, some of the responsibilities, about being clear of the purpose, next one about having a plan, and then the next one, reflecting and learning. So on the confidence one, I like this young chap because I couldn't do that to save my life. But, you know, the idea that you could jump up and hold on. So I want to just remind you that no matter what experience you've had, what has happened to you, you could be sitting next to somebody who's had the same heart condition, has the same obesity, has the same diabetes. You could see that the treatment and care has been very, very similar. But your experience is different from everybody else. So when you go in the room to talk to a group of people and you're talking, nobody can challenge you on what happened to you. It's your story, your experience, and only you have had that. So that's the first thing, is just to feel that when you walk in, understand you've got something to say, and it's right that you're there saying it. When I went into working in cancer, I went into a room and I sort of met a group of people, and they were Nobel Prize winners, Knights of the Realm, Sir and Lady so-and-so. Although they did tend to be mainly men. And I thought, what am I doing here in this room as a patient? And the more I listened to them, the more I realized they didn't really know how to talk to each other. That they built up their careers by being in a very narrow fields. And therefore, they were like some of the pupils I used to teach. So I realized that my experience wasn't just my cancer, it was other things that I talked to happened in my life. Right? I was told that patients weren't interested. I was told that patients couldn't understand research and that they burst into tears and that what they were doing as researchers was almost too complex for us. And then I realized that that made it sound like this is really paternalism. They think they know better than us. We were just seen as poor souls. And I realized the second thing, that I'm not there just to change a piece of treatment or a service. I'm there to change a culture. That power imbalance, that we don't have an equal voice. I also realized that, we have lots of things that we can do and know about. So I used to work with a colleague when I used to go into this, and her background was a solicitor. So when she said, well, as a solicitor, the whole room changed because they were going, whoops, we need to think what we're saying here. So bring other things to the table. In terms of your rights, I find it strange that in 2020, we still have to be saying and expressing an opinion that it's right to have our voices at the table. I think it's ridiculous that we're not at every meeting, at every conference, at every event. It is happening in some diseases, but not others. But when you stop and think about it, there isn't a company in the world that wouldn't want to know about its customers. Why wouldn't you want to talk to people who are experiencing what you are giving them? And I think that's our starting point. It is not just right, it is our right, and we should always be there. I'm just going through my notes. So, second thing in this is, if you look for policy statements, so if your government, if your local authority, if your local trust has written some statement and said, actually, do you know what? This is the right thing to do. If you've got that page, that paper in your hands, then you can put it under their noses. Right? Look for in it any recommendations of we should be hearing from it. It is an essential part of what we do, because those statements open doors for you. The third element in it for you is find some research. By research, I don't mean a big, huge, expensive study, start with a simple survey. If you just go in and say, well, from my point of view, swallowing and saliva glands are really important, then people can just dismiss you. If you can say, well, actually, I've talked to a lot of people in my support group. I've done a small survey and I did look up some formal research, then that backs your case. So that policy, any recommendations, research. The next area I want to go on to. And by the way, if you've got any questions, put them on the chat line. When I reference anything, we've got a little handout that has hyperlinks in it. In the purpose for advocacy, I say aim for the achievable. You might want to do something that's difficult, challenging. If that's the case, go for it. But if you're working with a group of people and trying to make changes, in cancer, what we said was do something that's achievable. Because what you want is to end up with a partnership with the health service and you and your group that makes them want to say, let's do more of this. That was really good. If you go in something that's in the too difficult cupboard, then that becomes almost impossible. But if you start with something that's achievable, I've said do it together. I always encourage, and in cancer we used to say, go in as a group of 3. If there's no 3 of you, I'll tell you how to be 3 people. We'll do that later. But have some sort of purpose. And whatever you do, measure it in small steps. Because otherwise you might think you've failed because change takes a long time. Even if all you end up with is a good relationship with the doctor, with the trust, the hospital, that's a plus. Don't lose sight of them. Let me just go back to my notes. Oh, just one thing from something earlier. When you're going into any meetings, if you've got a little badge or a folder to carry with you, bring them along. Because it stops you feeling nervous and thinking, I'm the person speaking here. What you want is, unlike Harry Potter with his invisibility cloak, you want a visibility cloak. If you're wearing a badge or you've got a folder, then you can actually say, I'm speaking on behalf of this group. Right? In your purpose, the last one on this, you've got a purpose of what it is you want to change. But a plea I would make to you is, we've got a bigger purpose in all of this. And that is always to address health inequalities. It is no good us going in and getting something that helps services deliver for us, but then also leaves other people behind. So always be fighting for equality and diversity, because that's key to making health available for all. So my next one, I'm going through speed, but I will do some Q&A later. So, I'm taking a little drink of water, excuse me. So in cancer, we used to say, do it as 3 people. We'd get one person to tell their past experience and what they knew it was like for people today. So the current one. So the center of the arrow. Because the reason we're advocates is that experience that we bring to the table. Then somebody else would say, well, I've just been reading about this policy. And then the third person would say, well, actually, I've done a local survey. And that triangle of those three things is almost impossible to argue against. And we used to say 3 people, because if one of you dries up, forgets what you were going to say, gets nervous, then the other person could take over. But if it's just you, then I would say, well, actually, swallowing's been really difficult. And after 25 years, it's still a problem for me. And what I'd like to see is all patients in the future being told what to do. Now, I've noticed that the policy says this, but in my experience, I've also spoken. So I can be those 3 elements of that triangle. Take forward that in your head, or in reality with 3 of you, and it becomes very, very powerful. So, on the right-hand side, who are you speaking to? If you're going to speak to people who are the doctors or the clinicians who deliver service, they're going to want to hear you mention something like the patient pathway. They're going to want to hear the words they understand. You might want to say about, well, like diagnosis, when I saw the GP, when I was referred to hospital. So speak in their language. Ask them what they think is the problem, because you want it to be a conversation. Say you want to help and be part of the solution. If you just go in and bang the table, they could easily just close the door to us. Go and practice it with somebody beforehand, because you might only get the chance to do this once. Think of it as a conversation rather than a formal presentation. If you go in and do PowerPoint, and I know that's what I'm doing, but if you go in and just have a conversation, it feels more natural. Last thing, have a solution. Have something in your back pocket that says, well, we think if we went along and talked to all new GPs, we thought if we talked to this or did this, or here's what it would look like, paint them that picture. Because again, that helps. Just going to flick back to the last one, the first bit there. Who are you speaking to? If you're speaking to commissioners, those who fund the health services, make sure you mention money. We think this would save X. We think it would save Y. So always tune it to who you're talking to. So on advocacy, this is where it gets a bit kind of about advocacy, not about some of the advice. This goes a framework that I quite like. You don't need to all to use it, but it's worthwhile thinking about. Along the bottom, it says, who are you talking to? Is it the public? Is it people who are influencers, or is it decision makers? So you might be doing public education, public polling, or talking to people who educate in policy. Up the left-hand side, is it to raise awareness? Is it to get people on board in terms of, do you know what, this is the right thing to do? That will. And then, is it about action? So, whatever you're doing, plot it onto that graph. And that will give you some ideas of how to extend it into other areas. and the link is available on the paper we sent out. So I'm getting towards the end. Then I'll have a little drink and then I'll answer questions. So, fifth bit of my talk is about reflection and learning. When you do advocacy, there's no point in doing it and not learning. So I've put up the plan, do, study, act cycle. I don't care what you call it, I don't care what you do, but you plan something, you draft it out, you define it, you clarify what it's going to be, you go and do it, then you study what you've just done, and then you act on the next bit of the cycle, and you write it down, because in a year's time, you'll have forgotten it, and then you can go back and see how far you've traveled. I put in asking thinking questions. It's Bloom's taxonomy by any other name. It's a way of reflecting where you are in your development. To begin with, as we get involved in things, I don't know about you, but my memory's going with age. So I always have to write things down. Remembering and doing them is the first thing. Then I start to understand what I'm doing. So I go in, I meet people, I start to advocate. Then I have to explain what my ideas are. Then I start to apply them. And then I analyze. Then I stand back and evaluate. Then I start to create new things. It's a good way of just doing our reflection. I've put Kipling's questions. I don't really like Kipling's questions because he talks about me, right? But basically they're there always when you're looking at who's doing what is it we're doing, why are we doing it, how are we going to do it. It's again a good way of going, have I got my plan? All right. Last thing for you is to each and every one of us, if we get COVID in the next few days, if we get a cold, if we get knocked over by a bus, who's picking up the baton? Who's next in line? And if we become really good at our jobs as advocates, sometimes others go, oh, no, that's Derek's job. Always be succession planning. And that's why I said about if when you go to talk, you can take somebody with you. You're growing them to take over and do what you've been doing. If you've been doing your reflection, you can teach them some of your skills. Margaret King, whom I worked with years ago, I went to sit beside her in a meeting, and she said, no, don't sit beside me. I said, but Margaret, we can pass notes to each other. She said, no, Derek, sit to the other side of the room. And I said, well, why? She said, because the chair can't ignore us. If we're sitting together, the chair can just avoid their eyes going to us. If there's two of us sitting opposite, we can chance things. So sometimes you need those little stories to keep you going. Last couple of slides. This is all about change. So you have to look at big change. Look at democracy. Look at people who've changed things. Look at the women's movement. And if you think about it, how women got to vote 100 years ago, have we still got equality? No, not by a long chalk. So read books of history. Read Susan Sontag's work. Read about Nelson Mandela, his time inside prison. Read about Michelle Obama and how actually it's about not just making a case for one, it's making a case for everybody. David Francis' book is about the HIV community. David Gilbert about the patient revolution. The Rage Women, I'll send the link out, is about women who had radiotherapy. And I wouldn't be doing what I did without them. Europa Donna, breast cancer women who have an advocacy and the framework I've spoken about. So, I've blogged about a couple of these things already. They're up there. Again, they're on the piece of paper that Maeve will circulate around. But I'll leave you with the late Senator John Lewis. There's a program on Sky, watch it, it's brilliant. And he just leaves us with the line, get into trouble, good trouble. Because that's what we're there to do, to disrupt and cause a little bit of trouble. Not getting tied to the railings unless we really feel that we've done everything else. And I think that's me there. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Derek, thank you so much. That has been truly inspirational. It's ironic that the title of today's session is Having a Voice, delivered by somebody who has lost their voice to cancer. But what comes across very strongly is the message that we're trying to impart in this series of advocacy is that mantra that there is no experience greater than your own experience. And that's where you have your currency in terms of the value you bring to the healthcare discussion. Before I open for questions, just a few points, a few notes, I suppose, I've taken. I think I'm very struck by your remark that your experience is different to everybody else and nobody can challenge you. I think there again, you're alluding to the power that every patient has within them. And this is important because, as you say, this is about change. And the reality is that historically, patients have been the recipients, passive recipients of care. And what we're trying to do here now is to redress the balance, the power balance, that they become the drivers and take more control of their own care. Self-care, obviously, but I think the point you made as well is very important. The bigger picture here is about addressing health inequality. So there's an altruistic dimension to what we should be about in terms of equity and diversity. I particularly like when you talk about this as being a right. Patients have a right to receive the best possible care. They have a right to be represented at all the discussions. I think that's a very strong message from today. I like the suggestion that you do something that's achievable, because very often when a group comes together, there's great enthusiasm and they make the fatal mistake of potentially biting off more than they can chew. And your point is very valid, that change takes a long time. And this is why, in the context of our group in the Global Heart Hub, we're starting on a journey that will be a long journey, a journey that will last well beyond our lifetime. And we need to be there for the long haul, and the succession planning thing is clearly relevant in that context. I think your point, practical issues about being prepared. I think this is very important, and you gave some very good examples, practical examples, how you can engage in these conversations. And I know that for some of the people that are new to this and new to advocacy, they're probably wondering, well, where are these meetings and what are these opportunities? And the reality is that there are many of them, and increasingly so, whether it's, as you mentioned, commissioners or engagement with health service providers around service user perspective. You have in the pharma medtech advisory boards. You have commissioners who are, looking at the pros and cons of introducing new services. You have now opportunities for patients to be part of the discussion in terms of medicine's life cycle at every stage of the process, from the research question all the way through to reimbursement. So there are huge opportunities now for patients to make their mark and to be heard. I really liked your advocacy framework. And I think, in fact, that framework is really highlights to those on the call today, just the diversity of the elements of advocacy. And that's what we hope our advocacy series will upskill people on in addressing the public, the influencers, the decision makers around everything from awareness right out to action. So I think it's been a hugely valuable contribution. I really thank you for taking the time. And as I say, I really mean it when I say you're inspirational. You've had your health challenges, and you still soldier on, and you're concerned for the future, which is really encouraging. I can't see everybody on screen. I can see quite a few. Anybody like to ask a question there? If you just put your hand up, and we can maybe call you in for a. Let me just see on photos. Is there anyone? Yes, Pauline, would you just unmute yourself and ask a question?
Hi, I just typed a question there, but I'll just call it out. I'm a heart failure patient, head of an organisation called SCAD Ireland, which is a representative body for people who have the heart condition SCAD. And I'm also a public speaker, re the patient experience. Derek, I want to thank you very much for your presentation and your expertise and know-how and skill. My question is, have you any tips for dealing with medical consultants who, and I phrase it like this, who think they know it all and don't need to hear the patient experience or dismiss it? And I say that I have found, I've been asked to speak at lots of conferences, but the higher up the profession in the medical sphere, the less they seem to want to hear. I've had cardiac nurses who welcome me with open arms to conferences, but the actual consultants themselves feel they don't really have anything to learn. And I'm particularly conscious, I have a very rare heart issue, and without education about it amongst the medical profession, many are being misdiagnosed and dying, unfortunately. So there really is a lot to learn. Any tips, Derek, how to win them over, charm them into listening to me, whichever?
Thanks, Pauline. You know, just cover your ears for a minute. Right? So, Pauline, first of all, look after yourself, right? That's the first one. It took me a while, and we still have those people with those attitudes around today. I would say in the UK there are less than there were. So that's why I said it's about a culture change. These are people who grow up and develop their skills by being asked repeatedly, what's wrong with this patient? So they have to give answers immediately. So they get into a mindset that goes, I've got to know what's wrong and say. So there's part of their training. So number one, see if you can get in to talk to young doctors in training to change that mindset. I think you're absolutely right. It's about charm and being nice. So I usually would go in and talk to a group of doctors, specifically consulted. So what are the big problems for you? What are the issues that if you had a magic wand, you could change it? And how could we as patients help you? And I've usually found that most consultants will go, well, actually, now you might have to sit for a long time, but you learn loads. It's that on the triangle understanding. And you get out of it a couple of things you say. Because I knew a patient in mental health, I know a patient in mental health. He said, when I got involved, I always thought they knew the answer. When I got involved, I found out they don't know the answer. But at least I feel I'm part of the solution and I don't bother my doctor as much. So for me, it's about creating that space in the middle. Last thing I would say to you is, I found it worthwhile dealing with people who are involved in research, first of all. So if you find consultants that are involved in research, their minds are thinking of, how do we make this better? Whereas a consultant or a doctor who's just delivering a service. So I could tell you of teachers who retired after 40 years, who were teaching the same lessons after 40 years. Whereas somebody who's involved in research is going, I wonder if I could do this better. So if you tackle the research community, and they're usually people who are influencers. So I hope that helps, Pauline. Good luck with your work.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think the key thing there actually is the young doctors, and at a local level, I am involved with the university. I've been a case study, but it has given me access to young trainees. So maybe I'll leave the old, the expression, the old dog that can't learn the new tricks, and I'll go for the puppies, and maybe I'll have more success that way.
The only thing to watch is some said, I think it was research, studies that said once the person is back in the system, they only need to be in for 6 months and they lose some of that inspiration. So it's how do you kind of keep feeding them as they grow?
I'll become their best friend and I will bake them buns and be very, very nice.
There you go.
Yeah, so
Thanks very much, Derek. I appreciate that.
I think that's a very good question, Pauline. And I often make the comment that doctors and nurses and healthcare providers they make a career choice to become a doctor or nurse or whatever, and a patient becomes a patient by default, and so there is that inherent imbalance in the power scenario. But I do think there is a culture change. In fact, in Galway, for the last number of years, we've been working on a special studies module in medical undergraduate training where we talk about the patient voice, and you can see that there's a different type of doctor coming forward now because they're living in a different world. They're living in a world now where patients have access to information, and patients are now becoming more powerful. They have a say. So I think we are moving in the right direction, but we do need to upskill ourselves. And that could be, as you say, making buns and speaking nicely, but whatever it takes, we can't lose sight of the end game. Anybody else like to pose a question? If you just raise a hand so I can see you. I just have a quick look.
Neil, can I say something?
Yes, of course, Salvatore. How are you?
Very well, thank you. First of all, let me congratulate with Professor Derek Stewart for this terrific presentation. I really appreciate it. The more I participate as MD, as a researcher, to patients advocacy talks, the more I learn, because it is really an opportunity that as doctors, as researchers, we should really participate to meetings like these, where we are really inspired and also we can change our mind. That's really important. Also, let me say also thank you to you, Neil, to put together so big effort to make the people with the different disease coming on the same point, right? So I just like to add on the last point of discussion that definitely we need to involve more as researcher patients in understanding what is the value of research, not only, but also to have their impression if this research is going to impact is true life in terms of outcome. And so this is really crucial. We have started in Italy, also thank you to Boehringer Ingelheimer, that is I think one of the sponsors, to involve Italian Association of Heart Failure Patients in project of research. And we are working, first of all, to let people understand more the informed consent. So to be practically, I think patients should be more involved in patient's consent format, because sometimes they even don't understand what are they talking about. And also, I think it's important that they understand the value of each kind of research. And just to conclude, for my many aspects, I think this is something as a breakthrough. And we really should go forward. And the fact that we have many representatives from many countries, different disease, put the effort together. And Neil, let's go in this way, because we can really work together in many countries using this network, right? So if you use this network in order to make the, let's say, quoted revolution of a patient be actor of the disease, of the research, this is going to be really impacting. So I just would like to say that this is the way, and we should probably, this is the last sentence, put everything in a document. So why don't we produce a document that is going to be what is the patient's need for research? This is something that probably we can do as a signature from many patients advocacy groups. So this is a proposal. But of course, it will take time, but I see the time to do that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Salvatore, and it's a very, very important point you make, and appreciate it. I just want to recognize as well, Stephen has put in relation to the earlier comments that in France, things are also evolving slowly in terms of young doctors becoming more receptive to patient experiences. But on the research piece, just coming back to that for a second, because I see Alison Fielding has also commented that she has become a joint author on a cancer study, which has helped her to get into this fora. Derek, you are, well, to me anyway, best known as a pioneer in the promotion of PPI, which for some people, they may not be familiar with this concept of public patient involvement. And I was definitely consider this as a topic for perhaps further down our journey, in that we're really trying to start at the basics here. Would you just give maybe in response to Salvatore's comments there, just a quick snapshot of what PPI is and how important it is, really speaking to his point there?
Thanks, Salvatore. I think the idea of a signatory of here's what we expect from research. So just quickly on that, about 20 years ago, we did very little qualitative research, and most cancer studies just had 2 outcome measures: alive after 5 years, alive after 10 years. But what women said was, for breast cancer, I'd like to be able to pick up shopping. I'd like to be able to pick up a grandchild. And what we now see are outcome measures that are far more tuned into things that matter to patients rather than not just. And what the researchers tell us is that actually that makes the research richer, more likely to be applied, more relevant to commissioners, because they can say, well, this trial made people sick, this trial didn't. They both caused the same, they both had the same outcomes of years of life, but actually, do you want one where you're sick all the time or not? So, absolutely. So patient public involvement is precisely that. It is. And I chaired the first group in cancer. So the task there was to get a bit of Pauline's comment. We fought to get representation on the top policy bodies. Why don't you have a patient in there? Why don't you have a patient rep? What are your subgroups? And we fought to get ones in there. And then on all the clinical studies. So we now have hundreds of people, because you have to be present in the room to make a difference. Our next stage then was to have those conversations and then change things. So what we fought for, and the most annoying thing is it gets shortened to PPI, whereas actually for researchers, there might be something you want to know from patients who had the illness years ago, patients who are cured, patients who have a recurrence. You might want to know with patients who live with it, but it's held at bay. Then you might want to know, well, we've talked to patients, but they now know. So what about the public who don't know? And I think sometimes the mistake we've made, certainly in the UK and less in Ireland, is we've formed it as 2 representatives on a committee. But you tend to get people like me, and you're just getting my viewpoint. So I think we're in a transition where some of the things they've done in Galway are about doing things in the community, in schools, with something called IFACs, where people can just put in a question and ask. So I think Ireland is a place to look at now more than the UK. I think I've addressed most of Salvatore's, but if he's got a question, I'll ask.
Thank you, Derek. And if I could just add to that, you know, it's interesting. I think this is where the patient voice is very important. When you look at, for example, the medicine's life cycle, or indeed in medtech, a device, the producer obviously needs to get it reimbursed. And currently the reimbursement decision tends to focus on hard endpoints, as you rightly said. Will this give you another 6 months, another year, or whatever? So from the get-go, the objective is to pass that test to get reimbursement. But actually, and more so even in the last year, as I've been at the privilege of being at many discussions where patients are talking about what matters to them most. And actually, in most cases, certainly in the cardiovascular community, if you gave somebody the choice of living a year longer or actually having a higher quality of life for 1 year less, being able to go to the grocery store, being able to play with their kids, being able to go for a walk, they would opt for the latter rather than the former. So there's a piece here of education and engagement all the way through that process, from developing the medicine or the device to the reimbursement. And I think this is where the PPI piece will have its greatest impact. So I think we're on a journey there. So hopefully we'll get there. I'm conscious of time. We have 4 minutes. Anybody else like to? Yes, Robert. Yeah. If you unmute yourself there. Yeah, you're live.
Yes, Derek, thank you very much. You're an inspiration as always. Every time I listen to you, I learn something new. So thank you very much. One thing that I've experienced in the last while is the education system, or more particularly the third level education system, still is not involving the patient early, or even teaching the new medical people or researchers that they need the patient as part of the journey of their learning. Okay. And I think this needs to happen at the education stage, so that when they become fully fledged researchers, it's automatic to have the patient as part of the research. Do you see any progress happening as far as that element of PPI?
I was involved with Leeds University, and they've been doing it for years, where the first meeting for the young doctors, trainee doctors, is they have to meet some patients. And the rule is they've got to meet them in their house. And the young doctors go, well, how will I get there, right? Because they'll be taken out their comfort zone. And those patients say to them, the young doctors are amazed because they make them cakes, they make them a cup of tea. I was on a train years later. I saw a young doctor. Well, I assumed he was a doctor. He was typing away. And I said, are you a doctor? He says, yes. I said, yeah. I said, where'd you train? He said, Leeds. as I said, I'm a patient advocate. I still have fixed in my brain the moment I met her house and what difference it made me. Instead of going, I'm really clever and all this stuff, to reminding me why I'm doing it. So I think there are some examples. What interested me when I talked to the patient group, because I was in doing the helping them to meet, was the patients wanted all the young doctors to know one thing. Are you looking after yourselves? Are you as doctors looking after yourselves? Mentally and physically. And that was a real shocker to the patient, to the doctors. So there are some examples. Sounds like Pauline's doing some of that. So you might want to have a chat with Pauline at some point. Because again, if you get one part of the school doing it, universities and colleges hate it when somebody's doing something and making it sound like they're better than somebody else. So that's how you creep it in. But certainly in Galway, I would say that from the president down, and maybe with my award as well, I think there's something there that says they're really interested in the community. So I think this is the bridge to go in. But good to see you, Robert. You're looking well. Nice to speak to you as always.
So, guys, we need to stick to the time, otherwise you won't believe us when we tell you in the future that something is going to be an hour and a half. So we've reached our time limit. Derek, again, a really sincere thank you. Congratulations on your award from NUI Galway. As I said, it's coincidental that we had actually reached out to you before we knew of that. You have left left us with some really inspirational thoughts and ideas here, and I know that will be of help to those of us on the call. And can I say to everybody on this call that we hope you'll stay with us on this journey as we build our exposure to these stories and build our experience and skill set to make a difference into the future. Lots of waves and claps going up there, Derek. So you were obviously a hit today. Thank you so much, and safe home to anybody that's traveling. There isn't much traveling happening here in Ireland. And we'll catch you, I think, Maeve, the next session is in December, isn't that right? I think you're on mute there. Okay, so we'll sign off for today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Good luck.